Welcome back to Voices from the House of Zophiel. Today, we've got Dr. Halo Quin. Now, to tell you something about Halo, and there's so much, but I'm going to condense it just to give you a flavour of who we've got today. Now, Halo is a British author, storyteller, singer-songwriter, and a practising witch, whose work bridges the worlds of academic philosophy and lived magical experiences. With over 25 years devoted to the craft, Halo has established themselves as a distinctive voice with contemporary paganism, particularly in their exploration of Welsh spirituality, fairy magic, and the revolutionary integration of embodied sensuality and the divine erotic into magical practice. And furthermore, I have to say, Halo has woven her life deeply into the landscape and lore of the land. Her magical practice is rooted in animism, devotion, and embodiment, centered in the Faery Queen and the deities of love and passion. She's an initiated witch, trained in both reclaiming things and the fairy traditions. She describes them as a changeling bard. A lovely phrase. And an enchantress who works and serves the re-enchantment of the world through beauty, pleasure, and sacred intimacy. Wow. Welcome, Halo.
Thank you. That's a beautiful introduction. Can I quote you on that?
Well, you can. I'll whiz it to you if you want. But no, it's all true, and it's absolutely marvelous. And for us listening today, it's just to get to understand you and know you a lot better. And of course, at the front end of the podcast, there's all your details and a much longer passage about you as well. But today, I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. People who know me know what I'm going to do. It could veer off into a journey of the untold, we don't know. And we could stick to these questions that I've clumsily put together. But here we go. Let's see what happens. But I think a really nice way in, an entry point, would be that something about your origins, okay? Mm-hmm. And I know that you have this lovely, well, what is it? It's a taste of an idea, really, about you when you were very young, coming across and finding a silver ring full of stars as a child, gifted by the fairy folk. And I'm just wondering, how did that early encounter share your understanding of what magic is, what it could be, and when did you realize that maintaining enchantment will become your life's work?
Wow, that is a beautiful and big question. So that story that you're referencing, that experience that I had always been absolutely fascinated by fairies. And the reason I became fascinated by the idea of fairies, the fair folk, and my concept of them evolved as I got older, of course. It expanded rather a lot. But the reason I was fascinated by them was because as a small child, I could feel this other world, these spirits, the world was alive and full of spirits. And my mum actually always brought me and my brothers up to be like, the trees are people. They're alive. They have feelings. Don't pull their branches off. That's mean. The plants are people too. And so there was that sort of element of animistic tendencies as far as we can get within growing up in Britain in the 20th century.
Right. Yeah.
So when I found that ring, I was in the school playing field. It was probably lunchtime.
Yeah.
And I just saw this little sparkle in the grass, and I leant down, I picked it up, and it was this silver ring. It fit me perfectly, and it was a band with stars cut into it in this pattern. And being a very honest child, and that has played into my magic in and of itself, I took it. I wanted to keep it desperately. I was like, this feels like a gift. This feels like a piece of magic. I didn't have quite those words for it, but I took it to my teacher and I said, I found this. Has someone lost it? So I tried to make sure it got back to the person it belonged to. And they said, I tell you what, you take it, go from classroom to classroom, knock on the door and say, has anyone lost a silver ring? And if they can describe it to you, it's theirs and you give it to them. And if no one claims it, then it must have been a gift from the fairies to you. And you can imagine my little heart. I was probably about 7 or 8 at the time, right? You can imagine me just going, oh, I hope that's true. I hope that's true. And I went and I knocked on every single door and I asked, has anyone lost a silver ring? And they were all, no, no, no. And I got back to my classroom and I was like, this was a gift from the fairies.
You.
For me. And I still have it. It went from fitting on like my middle finger to fitting on my index finger to now having to live in a little pouch because of course I got bigger and the ring didn't.
Yeah.
But that sort of piece, that thread has, and that understanding of there being magic in the world was evidently always present. And it wasn't until I was sort of when I talk about when I found magic as a thing, I was about 10 or 11, 12, about that sort of time, when I discovered that there were grown-ups out there that genuinely believed that magic was real. But even before that, I was brought up nominally Christian. So I was trying to write the perfect prayer, right? Which is spell work.
Yes.
So it was all feeding into that. So I think that even at that point, I knew that was where my heart was. My heart was in that place where the magic and the mundane met, was in noticing how those small moments are gifts from the spirits to remind us that they're there, that to look up at the stars, and there's this piece, isn't there, about rings in many cultures, about being like a promise. A ring being a piece of a marker of a relationship or an oath ring that you make because it has no breaks in it. So I sort of carry that with me. And yeah, it all grew from there.
Right, you've got me thinking now. I love the idea of rings as being symbolic and metaphorical and these kind of things that happen when we focus on something, particularly shapes. I mean, most of the basic shapes we know have magical content, and even though we learn about them even as children, we don't realize that they do things and what really happens. And rings, for lots of conversation, lots of different people that I know in the magical world, that, you know, they're either things as containers or they're ideas of protection from outside. And within both those things, and as they entwine, they suddenly become alive in a way. They're not static, they're vibrational, you know. So even in spells and rituals, and we draw circles, and we're either inside or outside, or, you know, whatever we do with, whether it's drawn or it's salt or it's with light, or, you know, it's by movement
or sound.
Yeah, or sound. Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah, of course. That these rings have become important to us as humans. And sometimes we get an idea of what they may be, and sometimes we don't. And that obviously falls into the stories that we know, which is a lot to do with your world, isn't it?
Well, yeah. There's something that what you said brought up for me there. And that's that whether it's a container or a boundary as protection, it's when we talk about containers and we talk about boundaries, we think of them as being like walls, as being things that divide us one space from another. But anything that divides one space from another becomes in and of itself a liminal space. It becomes that point of relationship. So the circle then becomes that a line, a point of relationship between the inside and the outside. It becomes a liminal space, that thin line of chalk on the ground, or the edge of the light, or the edge of the where you stand. If you stand in a circle with the fire in the center and you feel the cold behind you and the warmth in the center, you are that liminal place where anything is possible.
And of course, I'm just writing something down there, just to remind me, everybody else. But once we start to talk about liminality in spaces, then those edges, kind of belong to Hermes. And
yes,
all kinds of groovy stuff starts to happen then. It's not, I mean, is it an edge? Is that real? Is it where two things meet? I mean, as somebody who, as people know, went to Bath Academy and all the good stuff about that, wild child, early art students. I did listen once, but anyway, there was stuff to do with edges. One of my tutors was Peter Kinley. He's quite a well-known artist, not with us anymore. And he was obsessed with edges, and he used to talk to me, and he used to say, he's called me Paolo, because I used to do a lot of Greek stuff. And he used to say, it's all about your edges, Nat. It's about where things meet, and it's not real at all. But there we go. What can you do? And I'm like, thank you, Peter, for giving me that today. What do I do with that? And as I got older, I really started to understand more about things. Our realities or non-realities are all about the edges that we come across. And it's almost doesn't exist because they're meeting places. Sorry, I ramble. I should.
No. I'm like, but that's the question, though, isn't it? Right? What does it mean for something to be real? What does it mean for something to exist? Because this is the philosophy in me, coming out, but it runs through stories. Sorry?
I will come on to that, but yes.
Oh, yeah. But it's that piece of like, what is real? What is reality? What is part of our world? And a lot of the times when we say, oh, is it real or not? We're talking about, is there some kind of objective existence outside of ourselves? Like, is this a thing that is entirely separate from us? And of course, nothing is entirely separate from us, but it's in where those edges are that we meet that relationship and go and recognize something that is outside of our edge in our perception. And we experience it, and the experience is real. I mean, I'm genuinely, I like the spirits are real and independent of us, and the gods are real and independent of us. The world is real and independent of us.
Right.
And those edges are far less clearly defined than we think they are.
Right. I mean, you've kind of weaved into something I was going to ask you.
Okay.
It's all about the Faery Queen, because I do know that you've devoted probably several years to this relationship with the Faery Queen.
Oh, and then some. That ring.
Right. So just for people who are listening, possibly those, I can't imagine, but possibly that, because I know what our audience, I know who they are roughly, but I know that some of us may not be as familiar with this kind of work as others. So for the benefit of people who are listening, can you describe who the Faery Queen is to you, and how? It's a double question, I'm afraid. So who is she? And if we think about her, is she just one type of thing? Are there other elements? Is she a goddess, a fallen angel, a literary invention, or something that contains all these things? I mean, what do you think?
The first book that I had traditionally published kind of has this question running through it, right? And I wouldn't write that book today. It's very sweet. One of my friends described it as being perfect for like a 16-year-old girl wanting to get into magic. But there is this philosophical question running underneath it and woven through it. And that is that question of, okay, well, what is fairy? What are the fae? What are the fair folk? And how are they in the world with us? How do we relate to them? Because in order to understand, have a sense of their queen, right, then you kind of have to have a sense of who they are and where they fit within the world. And again, these edges are quite blurred, right? So for me, at my core, at the deepest sort of understanding of this, is that the spirits that we classify as fairies covers a very broad category. And some people will be very like, no, it's only these beings that live in a world that mirrors ours, right? There's like that very specific in the folklore. The fairies are these people, and this particular, they're other people. And other people are like, no, the fairies are the spirits of nature, right? Which is apparently that idea evolved out of the connections between classical, our sort of classical understandings, classical education, things around the nymphs and the dryads and what have you from the Greek and the Roman coming in, and us sort of going, okay, these spirits we have, they kind of look like those, and their spirits of the trees, so they're similar. And I'm like, there's truth in both of these positions. For me, these spirits, the spirits that are the thing that they have in common when we talk about the fair folk, when different people talk about them, and when different people are like, I saw a fairy, I met a fairy, right? I read a story about them. And the thing that they have in common is that they are our neighbors.
Right.
Right? They're other than human, but they're similar enough to us that we can interact with them, that we can fall in love with them, that we can fight with them, that we interact on each other. Which to me means that they are the spirits of this world. Right?
Right.
And included in the spirits of this world that are not fairies are also obviously other beings. Okay. So you've got like the spirit of the rabbit is a rabbit. It's not a fairy, though there are fairy rabbits. So we're looking at these weird liminal lines. So we've got these spirits of this world who are our neighbors, who are spirits. So they're shapeshifters. They don't have one set form necessarily, though they may have a favored form. And they are other than human, which means that they're not bound by the same set of rules that we apply to things socially. They are outside of our control. So they are a category of spirits that are part of the untamed wild world. Now, of course, the bit that gets complex with that is that when we actually think about ourselves, we are part of nature as well. We're animals as well. We're spirits that are part of that wild world. We've just forgotten. We've been taught to split ourselves off. And this is why they reach out to us and why we feel a draw to them, and other people are terrified of them or horrified by them because they are close enough to us to have an impact, right? They're close enough to us that it matters. So the Faery Queen, there's a couple of different beings that I mean by that. And at its biggest, most philosophical, when I say the Faery Queen, I'm talking about the consciousness, the spirit that is underlying all of those kinds of spirits, that blueprint, as it were, that holds that world, that holds that space. When we start to get more poetic about it, she is the singer of the song that shapes the world of the other, of the untamed other magic that is also ours, right? Because we're part of that world when we relate with it. On a more personal level, when I say I've spent most of my life devoted to the Faery Queen, in one broad sense, I mean that I have always been seeking and following that song and that relationship. It has always called to me, and I have answered that call. And there are ways in which she manifests as a specific being who appears in much the same way to me as when a deity or an angel or a demon or whoever appears, right? When a specific spirit appears, they have a kind of a certain quality of appearance and a certain amount of solidity to them. They'll often take a specific form. So when I'm interacting with the Faery Queen as a being, as a person, then she manifests in a kind of a similar way. And it's almost like the title, the Faery Queen, is a crown and a throne that is powered by, that is shaped by this force, this magic, the aspect of the singer of the song of the world's soul.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. There's lots of good stuff that's happening in my mind right now. I mean, one thing, I just had to write a couple of things down to keep me on track, but I think that this is a whole thing in itself. If we never get to the other questions, it doesn't matter, but this is very cool stuff. So when you mentioned your first book or one of your first books, and you're talking about the fact that somebody commented it was like a children's book. As far as
like a teenager's introductory guide to magic. And I'm like, that's important.
Well, for me, obviously for me, children's books are incredibly important in our informative years, but if not the roots of who we are. I mean, I do recall lots. I was read a lot of stories as a child, and some stories, and I'm thinking about fairies now, stuck with me for a long time. So Peter Pan was one book.
Oh, yes.
And of course, in a psychological sense, Peter Pan was part of my construct of where, as a child, I never really wanted to join the adult world, and yet I turned into Hook and was quite nasty until I learned better. And you learn through life, and you become a bigger Pan and stuff like this, and learn by mistakes. But other things as well are important to me. And we take people like C.S. Lewis and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Queen in this one as a figure of, well, possibly the shadow self and the battles with that and without. I'm sure you understand. But then on a bigger level for me is Alice, obviously, and she's become quite popular recently. Throughout my research, Alice played a thread throughout the whole thing, which I was told at university, oh, you can't do that now. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. I don't really care, because it mattered to me that what Alice is, because as far as I'm concerned, Alice is the two books of Alice, they're grimoires, really, of understanding. And I find that what Alice does through her curiosity is she finds her own regency at the end of the second book. She is the White Queen again, and I've gone cold now. So
yeah, I've got goosebumps all of a sudden.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
So she is a fairy queen in her own right. And I think in children's books, we get an idea of things. And then later, if we're lucky, we can bring those with us into our adult life, and they become many different things in terms of who we are and where we're heading for. So what you were just talking about is super important. And just the other thing I want to throw in is that recently, I'm a clairvoyant, right? So I do a lot of work with tarot every day, pretty much. If something happens or something occurs and I just need to look at this, that, and the other, and surrounded by many different decks. Some are absolutely awful that I buy, and some are absolutely glorious and wonderful, and they captivate your attention because they're highly symbolic, right? As images are. But the Empress has turned up week upon week upon week upon week. Yesterday, the Empress, and the Empress for me is a form of Faery Queen anyway. because he embodies that in touch with nature and the love of us all with the union of the work and the earth. And let's not forget, and she's a good foil for the emperor. He's not a bad guy, but he's just that kind of forthright, let's have some control over this, shall we, and stuff like this. But put them together, you get this beautiful combined element of a balanced way forward. And the world is an incredible mess right now, as quite a lot of people understand. Some people will argue with me. I don't care. All right. But these two guys, this Emperor and Empress are very present at the moment. So I'm really glad you said all those things.
So around the time that I wrote the originally called it Your Fairy Heart, and it became Your Fairy Magic when it got published. But around the same time, I actually made an oracle deck for.
Oh, right.
And the first two, and it was about the journey of traveling into fairy, of relating to the fair folk. And the first card in it is the Faery Queen, and the second is himself, the Faery King. Right. Obviously inspired by the Froude's card himself. And it's that piece in there of, if she's the singer of the song, he's the walker of the land. Right? You know, he's the one that walks across the melody and holds that beat, his footsteps being the beat, and being that relational piece. So I love what you're saying about the Empress as feeling like Faery Queen to you. And there is that piece in there as well of the love, the abundance, the like, you know, holding that space, but also the fact that they don't have the same human morals and what have you that we do. It's that whole thing about Mother Nature loves all of her children equally, right, including the ones who feed on death, and part of our nature is to end in this lifetime. Right? Yeah. And be part of that.
Yeah. I think it's something we struggle with these days. I mean, I hate to say it, but at my age now, I'm kind of looking about what I can share with people rather than I need to lead people these days and stuff like this. But I think that in terms of our social structure being human, and it has changed a hell of a lot. And it's changed because our sense of time of being children is longer. Our sense of time for being our teenage life is different. Being a young adult is not the same as it used to be. And there are differences in how we develop and what we believe we can and cannot do. Yep. And at the same time, there's something that is kind of drifted away in that understanding of togetherness, of where a lot of younger generations I'm Gen X, so I've got to be blamed for everything, right? Bad-tempered old punk rockers like me, but there you go. But anyway.
But Gen X was the ones that always get forgotten. The boomers get blamed. The millennials are still children.
Well, we still get told off.
Yeah, of course you do. Everyone's going to complain about someone. Sorry, anyway, carry on.
No, it's fine. But on the other hand, I do feel that there's something to be gained from this aspect of how do we belong together as people, and how do we belong together as groups and love each other platonically and just care for each other a lot more. And it's fell by the side a little bit, somewhat.
Yeah. And this is something that and this is a thread that ties all of my different pieces of work together. Obviously, you mentioned, like, obviously the fair folk, very important to me. But also that piece about the divine erotic and the sacred sensuality and sexuality, sexual magic, and the storytelling, right? So all of these pieces have at their core relationship. not like sexual relationship or romantic relationship per se, but how we relate to the other than human, how we relate to each other and the world in stories, and how we relate to ourselves with that, and our own, like our life force, which is that. And to me, these are all even more intertwined than that, because that rising up of life, the wild, as in untamed magic, that is our life force, right? That is connected to, is what we share with the fair folk. That is also the erotic, because once it's embodied, it is, and we feel it, we allow ourselves to feel it when we're allowed to, and it is safe for us to feel it. We feel it and we know it as pleasure.
Right.
And we express it, not necessarily sexual pleasure, but that's that being alive is a state of being awake.
I mean, you kind of drifted in beautifully there on something I was going to ask you about, two things really. So it's about the divine erotic, and I know you champion the embodiment. I'm just, as you've been saying, the embodiment of sensuality. And I think you call it the divine erotic, actually.
Yeah, sometimes.
Out of my head, but anyway, and it's a legitimate spiritual practice. I feel. What prompted you to challenge these ideas about the sacred and the sensual? And even if you do, have you encountered any resistance to that along the way?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah. So, just on a very basic level, right? If you look at the way that our particular culture is, our society is, like Western European and Anglo-American, colonialized, all of that, right? We're coming out of a background for various reasons. And I'm not going to lay all the blame at the feet of Christianity, that was the religion that was channeled through the empire. It's not like all that. It's not all from there. Plato has some things to answer for as well. But we've got in our culture, in the way that we're trained, in the way that we're taught, the way that we're trained to think about the world, to view the world, this separation, this perceived separation between the physical, the mental, the spiritual, all these different layers. So we separate them out into tiny boxes. Yeah. We separate the worlds out into boxes. We separate out our dreaming life from our waking life. We separate out all these different things. We talk about the other world as if it's somewhere else. And we replicate that through this does go back to the divine erotic, honestly, but we replicate this throughout our magical systems and practices. Right. We have goals to get into a higher state of consciousness by like meditating and transcending the physical. We have a separation in some of the descriptions between high magic, which is about spiritual evolution, and low magic, which is about getting the stuff you need to live. And these are all arbitrary. They're all created, fabricated divisions, because we can't be spiritually evolved living beings and have mystical experiences unless, and note that, living beings, unless our bodies are safe. Right, and looked after, unless we have space for that. And there are people, obviously, in extreme spaces who have learned to do extreme things and deny their body, and like monks sat on the top of mountains and they don't feel the cold, whatever. But most of us, we're not in those spaces. And so these things are interconnected. Having enough of whatever you need to be physically okay, and having your body feel safe enough to be present in, and know all of these caveats, because of course most of us are traumatized in various ways, have used disassociation to protect ourselves. Like this, I have chronic pain. There's all these different layers of things, right? Yeah. But being able to remember that our bodies and our life is in our bodies, that life force, that magic is part of that physical existence, our spirit, our mind, however you want to define these things. They're not separate categories. We're not little spirits with little controls sat in our skulls like we're driving around a robot, though sometimes we feel like it. So our culture encourages us to separate these things off and to like mind over matter and to prioritize and either value something over the other, whether that is to value the mental over the physical and say, well, you know, that all those physical needs are not really worth bothering with. They're like unimportant. They're dirty. Or prioritizing the material over the spiritual and saying, well, spiritual isn't really real, right? We're back to that ontological question of what's real. Spiritual isn't really real. It's something else. Or the spiritual is real and it's more important. Like we've got all these divisions. And that fundamental split within us feels to me like perceived split within us, feels to me and seems to me to be one of the core things that drives some of our worst behavior. Because when we remember and allow ourselves to rest in that connection and rest in that wholeness, right, of all of these parts of ourselves and all of those parts of each other being whole parts of being alive, then we start to see like, well, the tree is also a person, right? That other human being is also a person. The question of what we're doing with the resources we have is also a spiritual question. The, you know, low magic, high magic, like whatever it is that you're trying to do, the process of learning how to conjure enough money to pay the rent also hones your spirit for the work of, you know, whatever spiritual mystical experience you're seeking. And the spiritual mystical experience, you then know how to bring it home and integrate it. So this then ties back to the divine erotic, because one of the ways we're taught to split these things off is by being told that the erotic, that pleasure, right, of any kind, or sexual pleasure especially, right, but pleasure of any kind is bad, because it's either hedonistic and it's going to lead us down a dark path where we trash ourselves, or it's spiritually corrupt, or we're taught that like pleasure is found in empty sugar, right, which is actually poison, or in like things that numb us out. So we've got like this really weird idea of pleasure. And whenever I talk about understanding how to feel pleasure in yourself and letting that sense of true pleasure, not what we've been taught to follow for cheap thrills, but what our body understands as true pleasure. Like when we follow that, people always say, oh, you know, that's going to lead me down a hedonistic path and I'll trash my life. And I'm like, no, you won't.
I think also you've kind of touched on one of your books, right?
Yeah.
Right. So Crimson Craft, am I right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think if people want to, well, I'm pushing that because I think readers should read that book of yours, because it guides you through sexual magic for even solo practitioners.
Yeah. So the subtitle is Sexual Magic for the Solo Witch. And when I'm talking about sexual magic, I'm actually talking about that understanding of and reclaiming the fact that we are spiritual, sacred, sensual, physical beings. And it's for a solo practitioner, particularly because actually we need to feel safe in and of us, in ourselves. We need to work on and explore these things in ourselves. And we can do that with the help of our deities as well,
right.
Which can be much less stressful or triggering if we've had bad experiences, which many of us have, right? Before we're trying to engage with that in a relationship space. A lot of sex magic manuals are about how to, you know, wank off over a sigil, which
right.
Valid, right?
Well, if you need to, you need to, but there we are.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's about these things we don't normally talk about, because they're classified in various different ways of the taboo subjects, but actually they're not, because they're parts of what you are. And you do talk about in there that it is about a true understanding of what pleasure is and what power may be and what personal transformation can be because of these things. They're highly powerful things. And of course, you talk about shadow work, which, people who know me that I'm Jungian in lots of ways. And I think that, it does matter that you have to explore what you may believe is your shadow self, and you'll find out that it's not so bad as you think it is. And in my personal construct, and talking about astrology, I'm an Aquarian, of course, with Scorpio rising. So I'm doomed to be a bit dark anyway. So, there is something to be had for being comfortable with those sides of the self before they become something that is a problem. And why would you want something to be a problem? So I'm just recommending that. I think people should buy that. It would be super. I think if more people read that. Now, coming from that idea, I'm just gonna broaden the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
To coin a phrase. So we're going to talk about Welsh spirituality, of course. All right, a little bit. And I think you live in the heart of Wales, really, and around that area.
Yeah, I live in West Wales, right on the west coast. So right behind me is the sea.
Lovely. Okay. And I think it influences your work. So how does this Welsh landscape and its deities, again, speak differently than other spiritual traditions? What have the gods and goddesses of Wales taught you?
So, one of the things I think that you're probably picking up on is the obvious of that I wrote a Pagan Portals book, Gods and Goddesses of Wales. Right. And I've lived here for 20 years. I came here to do my philosophy undergrad and then stayed. I'm like, there's no way you're crowbarring me out of this place. Because as soon as I got here, and I was actually a bit further inland for my university, was at Lambton. As soon as I stopped and stood in this landscape, I felt like I was home. And I grew up in southwest England, okay, which if you're American doesn't look like it's very far. If you're British, it's miles and miles and miles away. You're like in the middle of nowhere, okay. But it's a similar sort of landscape to where I grew up, but there's a slight difference in it, and the difference in it is that here, the spirits, the magic is closer to the surface. It's easier to feel from where I specifically grew up. I grew up in Swindon, which is just down the road from Avebury, right? Yes. Avebury is glorious.
Yeah.
And it's also, there's lots of tourists. So you've got to kind of sift through underneath all the people. It's very powerful. The stones are wonderful. I used to climb all over them as a kid. You're not meant to, please don't climb on the stones. But you whisper your secrets into the holes. And so and they keep those secrets for you and your wishes come true. All of that. So I grew up in that space. But when I came here, there was just more space to breathe with that. And I wrote the book that I wrote specifically as a way, as an offering to give back to the gods that I found here. And what I found was in the stories, they are connected to the landscape, right? Ceredigion and Taliesin. So in Hanes Taliesin, which is the story, the history of Taliesin at the beginning, is the very famous legend of Ceredigion and how Taliesin was born or reborn as the great bard that he became. Yeah. Well, that story is actually set in a real place. You can go to that place. Most people describe it, I have a couple of friends who disagree, but most people agree that it is at Llyn Tegid, which is the lake next to Bala. A lot of people call it Bala Lake, but my Welsh friends and colleagues say don't do that because that doesn't make sense. In the mountains, right? And So when you read that story, or you listen to that story, you mull over that story, you feel into the landscape, Ceredigion is present, not as a human anthropomorphic being, but as that magic of transformation, of calling in the awa and the divine inspiration and offering that up to the land. You can feel that here. So I wrote the book as a way of, as an English speaker, like as a way of giving back and offering back those stories. And I tell those stories. So what has really shaped things for me, and as more native Welsh speakers and native Welsh teachers, Christopher Hughes obviously has been going for quite a long time, but Mara Starling is doing more, has been doing some absolutely amazing work. As they are teaching more in that, I've absolutely stepped back, because that was my thank you to the land, and it now is in my work, in my personal practice, in my relationship with the land. I work with those gods in the landscape, in local ritual. I'll take those stories to other places and share those stories as stories connected to this landscape, as part of our British heritage as well.
Right. I mean, you do mention this bardic path, yeah, and you do. Well, yeah, I think you describe yourself as being a challenging bard.
Changeling. Yeah.
Changeling bard. Oh my God, that's even more spooky. Okay, that's even better.
So I'll tell you where that. I'll just tell you briefly where that comes
the
from.
Goblin Circus, but you.
Oh, yeah.
No. Keep going with that.
Yeah. So the moniker Changeling Bard. So there's some controversy. So maybe it is a challenging bard, right? The around using the term changeling, because some of the history around that and around what happened to people who got called, real people who got called changelings. And then there's also the role in which it plays in neurodivergent spaces and in spaces where people feel a bit weird.
Right.
I felt that the term resonated for me because as a child, I was always away with the fairies. So when I heard the term changeling, I didn't really think that I was a fairy child left in the place and like the real Halo had been taken away. But I was like, oh, that poetically describes some of that sense of having a foot in both worlds that I felt as a child and as I grew up. And so when I started sharing poetry and particularly writing the poetry, that was where I used the title of Changeling Bard. So it's evocative, it's playful.
Yeah.
And as you say, yes, the influence of Ceredigion has shaped the way in which I tell my stories. That particular myth features heavily in the Storytelling for Magic book, which is, again, very small book. But I wrote it because people wanted to know how to tell stories. And everyone was saying, I wish I could do it. I'm like, but you can. Yes. You can. Yes. Just here is a process to do that. So yes, it does still influence and it does still come out. That is absolutely true. Yeah. And obviously being a storyteller and a poet and a singer, songwriter in Wales, bard just felt like the most appropriate term.
Yes. But also you talk about it being weaved into magical practices as well.
Mm. Well, yeah, if you think about, so when we do magic, whatever people are doing, 9 times out of 10, they are using some form of language.
Yeah.
And very often voice. And particularly in public rituals, but this holds true when you're on your own as well. And you're communicating with your own inner self, higher self, holy guardian angel, gods, with the spirits or with the place. The way in which you express yourself. So the way that you use your voice, that you use your posture, that you move, is a way in which you actually are physically affecting the energy. You're vibrationally and auditorially communicating and connecting magically with the beings who are listening, whether they're embodied or not. So those bardic skills of putting together words, speaking with confidence, orating, using your voice to evoke different sensations, feelings, emotions, right?
Yeah.
Those different skills, the ritual performance skills of a bard, of a performer, are actually powerful magical tools that both shift, they affect us. They cast a spell on us as the speaker, or if you're using sign language, like however you're doing it, if you're writing, however it is you're expressing that, all of these skills play in. And they affect the other people, and there are ways in which you can bring the other people in and connect. So this is something I'm very excited about, as you can tell.
Yes, I can tell. But also, just adding to that I know that you welcome magical neurodivergent people, right?
Yeah.
Tell us something about that.
Okay. So the term neurodivergent is not a medical term. It's not a diagnosis. It is a social justice term, right? So it's a social movement, and it comes out of the idea, the concept that just like there is biodiversity in the world, and that's a good thing, there is neurodiversity within humans, and that's a good thing. Basically, we've all got different brains and neurologies and ways of thinking, ways of seeing the world. And actually, overall, that is a positive. No one way is inherently bad or worthless. And that's a really important thing. All neurologies, all people have worth regardless of where in that diversity their neurology is. Within our current culture, at the moment, in Britain, in America, across Europe, there's been in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, there's been an explosion of understanding around things that we classify as neurodivergences. So neurodivergences is when people diverge from what is typical enough that it impacts on how they experience society, how they live in the world, how they interact with other people, right? So this then includes people who qualify for a diagnosis of ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, acquired brain injury, like all these different things. Sure. But we most commonly use it to refer to colloquially people who are autistic and ADHD. And these specifically have particular ways of seeing the world, of processing the information that comes in, of understanding and recognizing patterns, of communicating, of understanding communication, of process, like all of these different things, right? Of being in the world and being together, being in relationship, that have an impact on how people might approach magic and how different paths and traditions of magic are slightly better suited to different styles of neurology. But even more importantly than that, when we make space for people who seem a bit weird compared to how we're expecting them, when we make space for each other to be diverse, to all be different, right? Then we learn from each other. We learn to see things through each other's eyes. And it's much like you said earlier, you're clairvoyant, right?
Right.
I channel information quite easily. I have no idea quite what's going on there. That's something to do. Yeah, something to do with the way my neurology allows me to do that. Other people can visualize really well or hold particular spaces really beautifully because of the way they're wired. Other people struggle with being in that, and they bring different lessons. We all bring different things to the party, to magic.
I mean, we are incredibly different people, and yet we're still people in some form or other. But I'm just thinking about all my conditions. I mean, these days, I don't worry about any of them. I quite enjoy them all, really. I mean, I'm synesthesia. I don't think in straight lines. My wife struggles when we're driving. She said, "You going left?" I said, "Yeah, it's Thursday," because that makes sense to me. And numbers are colors and things like this, and even emotions are tastes and stuff. It's perfectly normal until somebody says, well, no, it's not really. I'm like, well, it is in my world, so why should I worry? And I think that our acceptance of things could be a lot broader because it's a bit richness of life, isn't it? Rather than it's a problem state because you don't fit in the box.
Yes. Conformity for conformity's sake is
like that.
Not helpful for anyone.
No.
There's a certain amount of like, well, actually, we do need some rules, guidelines, expectations in order to get along, but they don't need to be as strict as they are.
I don't think so. And I think it's just based on fear. I mean, what I realize about the world is that there's a hell of a lot of constraints because we're being taught to fear more than we used to. So, and I'm sure people would argue about me saying that. Hang on, let me just think about that for a moment. I don't care. So, I don't, and I really don't, because I see it all over the place. And what's happening for our friends across the pond is horrendous. And what's happening to other countries, I mean, places that I work, as people know, they're difficult places, and still their families and their friends and their children, and people go to school, and there's shopping and there's all sorts of things, and people are nice.
Yeah.
It's people in these war zones, and they're just people like you and me. And yet it's not them that's the problem. It's power that's the problem. And anyway, let's not go there. So
well, just to sort of respond to that, like actually rather than going depth, but to bring it into the space, right? We evolved to be cooperative. Like that's the leading theory, really, realistically. And you see that in how people are. For the most part, you can trust in the kindness of strangers. And when things get stressful, we will tend to like pull ourselves in, and the world is very stressful, and that's being played on. And that's why magical spaces, it's really important for us to go, okay, it's all right that like, okay, you're a pagan who wears fairy wings and dances around the bonfire to happy folk tunes, and you're an occultist that wears all black and silver and has a very like, academic way of doing things, and you work with angels and you work with fairies and you work with demons, like whatever, it doesn't matter, right? Actually, we have more in common.
Right.
And having the space where we can share those different stories and see where they overlap, share those different perspectives and experiences and see where they're the same and see where they're different and learn from each other in that. That actually helps to ease the fear.
Yes, exactly that. And I think that, I mean, I think I've said to you before, but many other people, that, the houses off your thing is about making magic accessible, because I think we need to talk more and look after each other and get stuff out there and celebrate each other and say, well, here's a person who does this. I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking about the Faery Queen, do you know Jo Hickey Hall?
I don't know her personally, but I do know of her.
I will connect you, because I think you need to talk to each other. She did a lovely course with us on fairies, south of Sheffield. It was lovely. And there's just some things you've been saying that I know should be super interested. So let me just do that for you. Lovely person. And then just thinking about the time for our podcast today, but I think I'll just draw it to this point really. And I want to ask about living magically. Okay. Let's go there. And I think you give an essence and a feeling of you live this enchanted life as a daily practice. And it's not just reserved in a ritual space, and we talked about spaces, but it's what happens on a daily basis and how you go through life. I mean, how is that for you? I mean, in terms of good times, how does that work? In terms of challenging times, how does that work? So for our listeners,
for me, you can probably guess what I'm going to say. It's rooted in relationship.
Right.
relationship with how I relate to and relate with the landscape, how I relate to and with the people in my community, and how I relate to and with the spirits that I know.
Right.
So I've obviously been doing this for a long time, and there is a powerful and important place for ritual and for designated separate like magical spaces. And one of the good things about them is that you learn by making those spaces and by stepping into them, and then by taking them down, closing them down at the end. You learn what that magic feels like when it's intense, and you learn how to move up in intensity and down in intensity. You learn how to bring yourself into a state of being where you are more grounded in the physical world.
Right.
And as you practice doing these things, and as you bring it more into your everyday life, like you also learn how to be feeling that more expansive, the more layers of reality, as it were, at any given time. So it's a slow process of practice.
Yeah.
But that roots in to knowing, and at the times in my life where I have forgotten, because we do forget. Sometimes I've had points where it like feels like I'm kind of numb spiritually. And at that point you start to doubt it. And at those moments, it's sort of remembering okay, I'm going to continue remembering that these beings are there. They've got my back. They're my ancestors. I have protective spirits. We all have spirits that want to work with us. And so if we just remember that they're there and ask them to be there and hold that space, we're keeping and maintaining that relationship. Making an offering to the fair folk and to ancestors and to my gods on a regular basis, of even just a little bit of water or a cup of tea for my ancestors in the morning is what I do, to be honest, with a little prayer. They get tea, they like tea. And that reminds me that I'm in a world that is enchanted, a world full of spirits, a world full of magic. So when things are harder, I've got that reminder, those little practices that anchor me. I have altars that I can see that are visual representations that might not look like anything to my landlord when he walks in, although honestly, probably the big plastic skull and the black candle does give away that something's going on, right? They've also seen my kinky poetry book, so and said that's okay. I'm still here 7 years later, so we're all right. But that, like, it might not look like anything to anyone else. They might not recognize it, but it reminds me. And when I see those things as I walk past the protection glyph on the door, or the stone that connects me, I take a breath. I take a moment to reconnect.
Yeah. And
over time, that's just sort of become natural.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's lovely. And to round that off, if I could do so, what I want to say is that I love what you're doing. I think it's superb. I think it's rich. I think it's enchanted. And just saying that in a world that often feels increasingly disenchanted and disconnected, I think what you're doing is re-enchanting the world, which is one of your phrases. So for today, for the sake of our listeners, we're going to round that off today. But thank you so much, Halo.
Thank you.
Super. And I'm sure we'll speak again. I think we've realised we've got quite a bit to do together, so that'll be cool. Yeah, we'll do another one.
Yeah. And you'll have all the links, but I'm always happy for people to reach out. We've got a community online that's going to be rebooted soon, the Enchanted Academy community, which is free for people to come and share things. So
I'll put the links on the front end of the podcast so people can see them. But thank you so much. It's been super.
Thank you.
Bye for now, and all your fairy friends.